genuine followers and constructive critics. How are you and your beloved today? It is activist from teacher, Professor S. Suresh, back with a shared delight for my 83rd video on annual of publication on you today, 23rd September 2020. Topic for discussion today is euthanasia, also known as physician-assisted suicide or mercy killing, arguments for and against. Euthanasia, also known as physician-assisted suicide (PAS) or mercy killing, it is from Greek, which means good death, EU, well or good. Thanatos, death, is a practice of intentionally ending a life to relieve pain and suffering. Different countries have different euthanasia laws. The British House of Lords Select Committee on Medical Ethics defines euthanasia as a deliberate intervention undertaken with the express intention of ending a life to relieve intractable suffering. The Netherlands and Belgium, euthanasia is understood as termination of life by a doctor at the request of the patient. The Dutch law, however, does not use the term euthanasia but includes the concept under the broader definition of assisted suicide and the termination of life on request. Euthanasia is categorized in different ways, which include voluntary, non-voluntary, or involuntary. Voluntary euthanasia is legal in some countries. Non-voluntary euthanasia, patient's consent unavailable, is illegal in all countries. Involuntary euthanasia, without asking con- consent or against the patient's will, is also illegal in all countries and is usually considered murder. As of 2006, euthanasia has become most active area of research in bioethics. In some countries, divisive public controversy occurs over the moral, ethical, and legal issues associated with euthanasia. Passive euthanasia, also known as pulling the plug, is legal under some circumstances in many countries. Active euthanasia, however, is legal or de facto legal in only a handful of countries, with a limit to with a limit which limited to specific circumstances and require the approval of counselors and doctors or other specialists. In some countries such as Nigeria, Saudi Arabia, and Pakistan, support for active euthanasia is almost non-existent. Like other terms borrowed from history, euthanasia has had different meanings depending on usage. The first apparent usage of the term euthanasia belongs to the historian Suetonius, who described how the Emperor Augustus, dying quickly and without suffering in the arms of his wife Livia, experienced the euthanasia he had wished for. The word euthanasia was first used in medical context by Francis Bacon in the 17th century to refer to an easy, painless, happy death during which it was a physician's responsibility to alleviate the physical sufferings of the body. Bacon referred to an outward euthanasia, the term outward he used to distinguish from a spiritual concept, the euthanasia, which regards the preparation of the soul. In current usage, euthanasia has been defined as a painless inducement of a quick death. However, it is argued that this approach fails to properly define euthanasia, as it lays open a number of possible actions which would meet the requirements of the definition but would not be seen as euthanasia. In particular, these include situations where a person kills another painlessly but for no reason beyond that of personal gain, or accidental deaths that are quick and painless but are not intentional. Another approach incorporates a notion of suffering into the definition. The definition offered by Oxford English Dictionary incorporates suffering as a necessary condition with the painless killing of a patient suffering from an incurable and painful disease, or in an irreversible coma. This approach is included in Marvin Cole and Paul Kurtz's definition of it as a mode or act of inducing or permitting death painlessly as a relief from suffering. The third element incorporated into many definitions is that of intentionality. The death must be intended rather than being accidental, and the intent of the action must be merciful death. Even for animals, they do that. Michael Rain argued the principal thing that distinguishes euthanasia from intentional killing. Be a good motive insofar as the good of the person killed is concerned. Likewise, James Field argued that euthanasia entails a sense of compassion towards the patient in contrast to the diverse, non compassionate motives of serial killers who work in healthcare professions. Similarly, Heather Draper speaks of the importance of motive, arguing that the motive forms a crucial part of arguments for euthanasia because it must be the best interest of the person on the receiving end. Definition as that, such as that offered by the House of Lords Select Committee on Medical Ethics takes this path, where euthanasia is defined as a deliberate intervention undertaken with the express intention of ending life to relieve intractable suffering. Beauchamp and Davidson also highlight Baruch Brody's as an act of euthanasia is one in which one person kills another person for the benefit of the second person who actually does benefit from being killed. Draper argued that any definition of euthanasia must incorporate four elements: an agent and a subject, an intention, a causal proximity such that the actions of the agent lead to the outcome, and an outcome. Based on this, she offered a definition incorporating those elements, stating that euthanasia must be defined as death that results from the intention of one person to kill another person using the most gentle and painless means possible, that is motivated solely by the best interest of the person who dies. Prior to Draper, Beauchamp and Davidson had also offered a definition that includes these elements. Their definition specifically discounts fetuses to distinguish between abortions and euthanasia. Voluntary euthanasia is conducted with the consent of the patient. Active voluntary euthanasia is legal in Belgium, Luxembourg, and Netherlands. Passive voluntary euthanasia is legal throughout the US when the patient brings about their own death with the assistance of a physician. The term assisted suicide is often used instead. Assisted suicide is legal in Switzerland and the US states of California, Oregon, Washington, Montana, and Vermont. Non-voluntary euthanasia is conducted when the consent of the patient is unavailable. Examples include child euthanasia, which is illegal worldwide but decriminalized under certain specific circumstances in the Netherlands under the Groningen Pen Protocol. Involuntary euthanasia is conducted against the will of the patient. Voluntary, non-voluntary, and involuntary types can be further divided into passive and active variants. Passive euthanasia entails the withholding treatment necessary for the continuance of life. Active euthanasia entails the use of lethal substances or forces and is more controversial. While some authors consider these terms to be misleading and unhelpful, they are nonetheless commonly used. In some cases, such as the administration of increasingly necessary but toxic doses of painkillers, there is a debate whether or not to regard the practice as active or passive. Historically, the euthanasia debate has tended to focus on a number of key concerns. According to euthanasia opponent Eskil Emanuel, proponents of euthanasia have presented four main arguments: that people have the right to self-determination and thus should be allowed to choose their own fate. Assisting a subject to die might be a better choice than requiring that they continue to suffer. That the distinction between passive euthanasia, which is often permitted, and active euthanasia, which is not substantial. And permitting euthanasia will not necessarily lead to unacceptable consequences. Pro euthanasia activists often point to countries like the Netherlands and Belgium and states like Oregon where euthanasia has been legalized to argue that it is mostly unproblematic. Similarly, Emmanuel argues that there are four major arguments presented by opponents of euthanasia. Not all deaths are painful. Alternatives such as the cessation of active treatment combined with the use of effective pain relief are available. The distinction between active and passive euthanasia is morally significant, and legalizing euthanasia will place society on a slippery slope which will lead to unacceptable consequences. In fact, in Oregon in 2013, pain wasn't one of the five reasons people sought euthanasia. Top reasons were a loss of dignity and a fear of burdening others. In the US in 2013, 47% nationwide supported doctor assisted suicide. This included 32% of Latinos, 29% of African Americans, and almost nobody with disabilities. A 2015 Populus poll in the UK found broad public support for assisted dying. 82% of people supported the introduction of assisted dying laws, including 86% people with disabilities. One concern is that euthanasia might undermine final filial responsibility. In some countries, adult children of improvised parents are legally entitled to support payments under filial responsibility laws. 30 out of the 50 US, as well as France, Germany, Singapore, and Taiwan, are filial responsibility laws. This This Encyclopedia of American Law states that a mercy killing or euthanasia is generally considered to be a criminal homicide and is normally used as a synonym for homicide committed at a request made by the patient. The judicial sense of the term homicide includes any intervention undertaken with the express intention of ending of life, even to relieve intractable suffering. Not all homicides is lawful. Two designations of homicide that carry no criminal punishment are justifiable and excusable homicide. In most countries, this is not the status of euthanasia. The term euthanasia is usually confined to the active variety. The University of Washington website states that euthanasia generally means that the physician would act directly, for instance, by giving a lethal injection to end the patient's life. Physician assisted suicide, PAS, is thus not classified as euthanasia by the US state of Oregon, where it is legal under the Oregon Death with the Dignity Act. Despite its name, it is not legally classified as suicide either. Unlike physician assisted suicide, withholding or withdrawing life sustaining treatments with the patient consent, voluntary, is almost unanimously considered, at least in the US, to be legal. The use of pain medication to relieve suffering, even if it hastens death, has been held as legal in several court decisions. Some governments around the world have legalized voluntary euthanasia, but most commonly it is still considered to be criminal homicide. In the Netherlands and Belgium, where euthanasia has been legalized, it still remains homicide, although it is not prosecuted and not punishable if the perpetrator, the doctor, meets certain legal conditions. In a historic judgment, the Supreme Court of India legalized passive euthanasia. The apex court remarked in the judgment that the Constitution of India values liberty, dignity, autonomy, and privacy. A bench headed by Chief Justice Deepak Misra delivered an unanimous judgment. A 2010 survey in the US of more than 10,000 physicians found that 16.3% physicians would consider halting life sustaining therapy because the family demanded it, even if they believed that it was a premature. Approximately 54.5% would not, and the remaining 29.2% responded it depends. The study also found that the 45.8% of physicians agreed that physician assisted suicide should be allowed in some cases. 40.7% did not, and the remaining 13.5% felt it depended. In UK, the assisted dying campaign group Dignity in Dying cites research in which 54% of general practitioners support are neutral towards a law change on assisted dying. Similarly, a 2017 Doctors NetDart UK poll reported in the British Medical Council stated that 55% of doctors believe assisted dying in defined circumstances should be legalized in the UK. One concern among healthcare professionals is the possibility of being asked to participate in euthanasia in a situation where they personally believe it to be wrong. In a 1996 study of 852 nurses in adult intensive care units (ICUs), 19% admitted to participating in euthanasia. 30% of those who admitted to it also believe that euthanasia is unethical. The Roman Catholic Church condemns euthanasia and assisted suicide as morally wrong. It states that intentional euthanasia, whatever its forms or motives, is murder. It is gravely contrary to the dignity of the human person and to the respect due to the living God, his creator. Because of this, the practice is unacceptable within the church. The Orthodox Church in America, along with the Eastern Orthodox churches, also opposes euthanasia, stating that euthanasia is a deliberate cessation of human life and as such must be condemned as murder. Many non-Catholic churches in the US take a stance against euthanasia. Among Protestant denominations, the Episcopal Church passed a resolution in 1991 opposing euthanasia and assisted suicide, stating that it is morally wrong and unacceptable to take a human life to relieve the suffering caused by incurable illnesses. Protestant and other non-Catholic churches which oppose euthanasia include Assemblies of God, Church of Jesus Christ of Later Day Saints, Church of the Nazarene, Evangelical Lutheran Church in America, Presbyterian Church in America, Lutheran Church, Missouri Synod, Reformed Church in America, Salvation Army, Seventh day Adventist Church, Southern Baptist Convention, United Methodist Church. The Church of England accepts passive euthanasia under some circumstances, but is strongly against active euthanasia and has led opposition against recent attempts to legalize it. The United Church of Canada accepts passive euthanasia under some circumstances, but it is in general against active euthanasia. Growing acceptance now that active euthanasia has been legalized in Canada. Euthanasia is a complex issue in Islamic theology. However, in general, it is considered contrary to Islamic law and holy texts. Among interpretations of the Quran and Hadith, the early termination of life is considered is a crime, be it suicide or helping one commit suicide. The various questions on the cessation of medical treatment are mixed with and considered a different class of action than direct termination of life, especially if the patient is suffering. Suicide and euthanasia are both crimes in almost all Muslim majority countries. There is much debate on the topic of euthanasia in Judaic theology, ethics, and general opinion, especially in Israel and the US. Passive euthanasia was declared legal by Israel's highest court under certain conditions and has reached some level of acceptance. Active euthanasia remains illegal. However, the topic is actively under debate with no clear consensus through legal, ethical, theological, and spiritual perspectives. Euthanasia and assisted suicide raise crucial questions regarding the value of life, the goodness of death, and an individual's right to determine the length of his or her life and the circumstances of his or her death. As even the most cursory review of popular media and academic scholarship indicate, assisted dying is controversial both morally and legally. The movement to legalize physician assisted dying, PAD, in the US is at its core one that focuses on a terminally ill component adult, TICA, who, because of unbearable pain and suffering, seeks a physician's assistance to hasten death. Euthanasia and physician assisted suicide, PAS, are prohibited in most of the countries of the world. However, the controversy about legalizing euthanasia and PAS tends to occur more in North America, Europe, and Australia than it does in Asia, Africa, America, and the Middle East. Although there are exceptions to this trend, the World Federation of Right to Die Societies claims that its member societies are spread all over the six continents. No two societies, however, are alike in their philosophy or practice. Nonetheless, all societies have the mission to attain a right for the individual to make a decision for himself towards the end of his or her life. The same way, there is a variety of theological and secular groups who oppose any attempt towards legalizing euthanasia in any form, advocating the sanctity of life, the argument of slippery slope, and the medical professional ethics. Out of this maze of warring ideological and ethical debate, it seems appropriate to take account of the status of euthanasia in various countries. Euthanasia is not legal in China and Hong Kong. It is against the Chinese concepts of mortality. According to the existing law of the country, it is equivalent to murder. The Japanese government has no official laws on the status of euthanasia, and the Supreme Court of Japan has never ruled on the matter. Further to date, Japan's euthanasia policy has been decided by two legal local court cases, one in Nagoya in 1962, another one after an accident at Tokai University in 1995. In Russia, euthanasia is illegal, but courts have been sympathetic to people charged with helping others die. South Africa criminalizes PAS, that is physician assisted suicide. Active euthanasia is illegal under Thai law. Euthanasia is illegal in the UK. Any person found to be assisting suicide is breaking the law and can be convicted of assisting suicide or attempting to do so. The first instance of legal sanction of euthanasia took place in Oregon, a northwestern state in the US. In 1994, the state adopted the Oregon Death and Dignity Act that allowed people who had been diagnosed with a terminal illness and had 6 months to live to take a lethal dose of 127 prescribed medications and die voluntarily. Since the passage of the act, 401 people have adopted this measure, most of them over 80 years of age and suffering from cancer. In 2006, the US Supreme Court upheld the law despite President Bush's opposition. The provision of death with the Dignity Act deserves special attention as the act was first of its kind to be enacted in modern times. The issue of legalization of euthanasia in India can be better understood from 2 points of view: reflection from cultural and historical heritage of India, and to contemporary socio-medical legal scenario. In almost all societies, individual and social life was governed by social customs during the ancient and medieval ages. Social value preceded human values. India is no exception to this rule. India had to remain under the rule of customs. Howsoever, some of them might appear as tyrant and unjustified today. Indian culture seems to create an ambivalent attitude towards suicide and euthanasia. On the other, on the one hand, sanctity of life was taken to be the highest value, and the violation of including suicide was considered the highest sin. But on the other hand, suicidal acts are glorified if they occurred in defense of social values. The customs of sati, johar, saka, Caesarea may be taken as evidences of providing the above arguments. Sati stood for custom of self-immolation of a widowed woman by setting at the funeral pyre of a deceased husband. Besides Sati, Jahar, and Saka, which were performed in defense of social values and customs, there are umpteen stories in Puranas and Vedas in which both men and women voluntarily accepted death by immolating their mortal bodies by various means, including fire. The power of yoga makes them oblivious of the pain of the decay of the mortal body. Hinduism made the provision of self-willed death also. Death is like a meditation, a samadhi. That is why it is called Maha, Great Samadhi. Jains, a religious and business community of India, claims same or sometime more antiquity as Hinduism. They have an ancient custom called Salakana or Santara. According to this custom, a person can take a vow not to drink or eat food till his last breath. It is also to be maintained that Santara is not the preserve of Jain monks who are renounced worldly affairs. The defenders of Salakana or Santara argued that Santara has a religious context, whereas suicide and abetment to suicide fall in criminal context. However, moreover, hunger strikes are a common form of protest in India, but often end with forced hospitalization and criminal charges. Besides, a suicide is itself contentious since it would punish only an unsuccessful attempt at suicide. Also, punishable how far this provides deterrence is questionable. Lastly, suicide is usually an outcome of acute mental depression followed by self-isolation. A person may leave a suicide note also. The act of suicide is instantaneous and not a prolonged ritual, whereas in Santara, the person takes a vow not to have food or water, and it is a slow process which takes place amidst the dear ones and other fellow co-religionists. Santara is not practiced with an intention to end one's life, but to end its own karmas and to achieve self purification through the act of renunciation of the all worldly actions, including food and water. In addition to it, and if an individual feels he can continue or has a desire to live, an individual can break a vow. The Santara can't be in any way considered as suicide. With the Salakana or Santara, death is welcomed through a peaceful, tranquil process, providing peace of mind for everyone involved. As regards the question of its legality, it can be stated that, like all religious practices, the question cannot be decided on the basis of rationality and law alone. At present, it is not clear on what grounds and statistics is to be held illegal. Thus, the cultural heritage of Indian reflects a cultural ambivalence towards suicide and euthanasia. If one looks at the contemporary Indian society, one may certainly find it undergoing the powerful and rapid cross elements, cross currents of multidimensional process of powers of social change. It is engrossed in the process of development and modernization, although it is a fact that its solid edifice founded on age-old traditions of caste and religion is crumbling in the whirlpool of change. Yet it appears to be still strong enough to hold on. Religion and caste still continue to provide main context for understanding the contemporary India. Society in India continues to be structured on the principle of social hierarchy and precedent of group over the individual. In fact, contemporary Indian society appears to exist at multi-level stage of civilization development simultaneously. The body of Indian polity is suffering from many threatening viruses. India is 87th ranked among the corrupt nations. Wikipedia 2010. The virus of corruption is eating the virus of institutional organs of socio-political India. It is almost unfortunate that the corruption is being accepted part of the game and becoming a component of people's mentality. Moreover, there is criminalization of politics and politicization of crime. There is nefarious nexus of corrupt politicians, unethical bureaucrats, debased capitalists, and mafias. Self-centered individualism and materialism have become the codes of social conduct. The noble professionals like teaching, medicine, and law have lost the ethical values of the profession. Individual autonomy and human rights have become verbose to be talked of it in public, not to be practiced in personal life. One ethical issue in that of dignified death and the related matter of legalization of euthanasia. Many people have a fear today of being kept alive artificially by a life support system with consequent sufferings and distress to them and members of the family. They may wish to request the doctor to withhold or withdraw such statement so that they may die with dignity among the dear ones. Voluntary, passive euthanasia. They may request the doctor to give a lethal dose to end the suffering. Active euthanasia. Herein lies the origin of debate over the issue of legalizing euthanasia in India. The financial implications of a futile treatment have serious implications for the patient and his relatives uh, for maintaining an unmaintainable life. Opponents of euthanasia, however, argue that Hippocratic Oath and International Code of Medical Ethics insist that the doctor should alleviate the suffering and pain of his patients at all costs. It does not make sense to consider ending the suffering of a person by putting an end to the sufferer. The treatment of the severe headache is not the removal of the head, but in seeking ways of relieving the pain while keeping the head intact. Moreover, the disease which is incurable today might become curable tomorrow. Who knows? Thus, the medical situation in India does not provide an easy ground for resolution of the issue of legalization of euthanasia. The rampant corruption in India and widening gap between rich and poor and the accessibility of medical services makes the problem more enigmatic. Now it is time to see the current legal status of euthanasia in India. Voluntary euthanasia, withholding or withdrawing life support of a terminally ill patient of physician-assisted suicide, PAS, continues to be illegal in India. Palliative care, yeah, and quality of life issues in patients with terminal illnesses like advanced cancer and acquired immune deficiency syndrome (AIDS) have become an important area of clinical care and investigation. Significant progress has been made in extending a palliative care quality of life research agenda to the clinical problems of patients with cancer, including efforts that focus on mental health related issues such as neuropsychiatric syndromes and psychological symptoms in patients with the terminal medical illness. However, perhaps the most compelling and clinically relevant mental health issues in palliative care today concern the desire for death and PAS and the relationship to depression. The arguments supporting legalization of euthanasia PAS are substantial. Proponents perceive PAS as an act of humanity toward the terminally ill patient. They believe the patient and family should not be forced to suffer a long and painful death, even if the only way to alleviate the suffering is through suicide. According to the proponents of PAS, it becomes ethical and justified when the quality of life of the terminally ill patient becomes so low that death remains the only justifiable means to relieve his suffering. Lack of any justifiable means of recovery and the dying patient himself making the choice to end his or her life are conditions which make euthanasia more justifiable. To the advocate of for PAS, legalization of PAS is a natural extension of patients' autonomy and the right to determine what treatments are accepted or refused. Arguments in favor of legalization of PAS are typically premised on the assumption that requests for PAS are rational decisions given the circumstances of terminal illness, pain, increased disability, and fears of becoming or continuing to be a burden to family and friends. Given the possibility that these symptoms and circumstances may not be relieved, even with aggressive palliative care and social services, the decision to hasten one's death may seem rational. Proponents of euthanasia also criticize the artificial impractical demarcation drawn by the court and the religious organizations between active and passive euthanasia. Withdrawal of life support, the classical form of passive euthanasia, actually involves taking an active step to hasten the death of an terminally ill patient, and it is a patient's consent which lends legitimacy to the act. If following consent of a similar nature, a physician administers a lethal dose of injection, there is no reason why this act should be considered as the illegal or immoral. Moreover, the desire to include one's physician in carrying out a decision to end one's life can be viewed as an extension of the natural reliance of terminally ill patients on their physicians for help with the most aspects of the illness, as well as reasonable mechanism to ensure that they do not become more disabled and burdensome to their family and friends by attempting suicide unsuccessfully. Another argument raised by proponents of legalization is that merely knowing that one can control the timing and manner of death serves as a form of psychological insurance for dying patients. In other words, knowing there can be an escape from the suffering of illness may alleviate some of the stress associated with the dying process. It may be argued that many individuals with a terminal illness desire the option to end their lives if certain possible conditions arise, even though the likelihood that they will utilize the option is small. Opposition to legalization of PLASA and euthanasia has come from numerous different perspectives. As frequently noted in the editorial pages of various medical journals, the medical profession is guided by a desire to heal, and extend life. This guideline is best exemplified in the Hippocratic Oath, which states, I will prescribe regimen for the good of my patients according to my ability and my judgment and never do harm to anyone. To please no one will I prescribe a deadly drug or nor give advice that may cause his death. Thus, the possibility that a physician may directly hasten the death of the patient, one whom the physician has been presumably treating in an effort to extend and improve life, contradicts a central tenet of the medical profession. From a mental health perspective, professional psychiatric and psychological training reinforces the view that suicide should be prevented at all costs. Several studies have supported this connection between mental disorder, example depression and interest in PAS, suggesting that suicidal ideation in terminally ill patients is a manifestation of undiagnosed, untreated mental illness. Consequently, physician compliance with the suffering patient's stated wish for PAS may circumvent the provision of appropriate psychiatric care. Similar arguments have been made regarding pain and physical symptoms, suggesting that requests for PAS may be evidence of inadequate palliative care. In spite of the fact that improperly managed physical and psychiatric symptoms may underline patients' wish for hastened death, physicians may unknowingly participate in PAS designed to alleviate precisely these symptoms that possibly could be managed with better palliative care, as opposed to providing proper medical management if PAS is legalized. Opponents of PAS additionally posit that individuals of lower socioeconomic classes or other disenfranchised groups will be coerced, either directly or indirectly, into requesting PAS as a means for resolving the difficulties posed by the illness. Family members may subtly suggest that death, since inevitable, since inevitable, would be preferred if it occurred sooner rather than later because of the social and financial burdens involved in caring for the terminally ill family members. Physicians may view PAS perhaps because of their own unrecognized feelings, counter transference as the appropriate and preferable response to a terminal illness and resulting disability. Thus, physicians may be particularly poor at recognizing irrational requests for PAS because of the belief that they would not want to live in a condition similar to that of their patients. An even more frightening possibility is that physicians or other healthcare providers might recommend PAS as an option because the alternative, providing adequate palliative care, is too expensive or difficult to obtain. Thus, patients with the poor health insurance or limited financial resources may be coerced into requesting PAS by poorly managing or untreated physical and psychological symptoms, perceiving their only options to be either continued suffering or death. Several studies have demonstrated inadequate recognition and treatment of both psychological and physical symptoms, with symptoms such as depression and anxiety going largely unrecognized in many medically ill patients. According to a recent review of palliative care in Canada, only 5% of dying patients in Canada receive adequate palliative care. These and related studies are often cited as by opponents of legalization of for PAS euthanasia as evidence that legalization is premature until all dying patients and their families have access to skilled and effective palliative care service. In response to these concerns, Legislators proposing guidelines for PAS have incorporated several mechanisms to minimize the risk that PAS, if legalized, will be misused. These guidelines include voluntary requests for assistance in dying on the part of the patient, evidence of a terminal illness, and documentation by the primary physician of the reason for the request and efforts made to optimize the patient's care. Opponents, however, suggest that these limitations are more arbitrary than scientific, and they argue that the legal and medical communities will eventually end up on a slippery slope where euthanasia is ultimately legalized as an acceptable practice for a wider population, including non-terminal, non-voluntary patients. It has been pointed out that in Hinduism, the word for suicide, atmagata, has also the elements of intentionality. The intention to voluntarily kill oneself for selfish motives was condemned in Hinduism. Subjectively, the evil sprang from a product of ignorance and passion. Objectively, and the evil encompassed the karmic consequences which impeded the progress of liberation. It was in this context that the Dharma Sutras vehemently which the ties that bind one man's self or soul to cosmic impermanence can be completely broken, and through which ultimate goals of immortality and freedom can be finally and definitely attained. The Medical Council of India (MCI), in a meeting of its ethics committee in February 2008, in relation to euthanasia, opinion practicing euthanasia shall constitute unethical conduct. However, on special occasions, the question of withdrawing supporting devices to sustain cardiopulmonary function even after brain death shall be decided only by a team of doctors and not merely by the treating physician alone. A team of doctors shall declare withdrawal of support system. Such teams shall consist of the doctor in charge of the patient, chief medical officer in charge of the hospital, and the doctor nominated by the in charge of the hospitals from the hospitals from the hospital staff or in accordance with the provisions of the Transplantation of Human Organ Act 1994. In India, euthanasia is a crime section under Section 309 of Indian Penal Code. IPC deals with the attempt to commit suicide, and Section 306 of the IPC deals with abetment of suicide. Both actions are punishable. Only those who are brain dead can be taken off life support with the help of family members. Likewise, the Honorable Supreme Court is also of the view that the right to life guaranteed by Article 21 of the Constitution does not include the right to die. The court held that Article 21 is a provision guaranteeing protection of life and personal liberty, and by no stretch of imagination can extension of life be read into it. However, various pro-euthanasia organizations, like the most prominent group among them being the Death and Dignity Foundation, keep on fighting for legalization of an individual's right to choose his own death. In my opinion, euthanasia and PAS are a blend of legal, sentimental, and ethical issues. Decisions should be based on proper analysis of the case and not for monetary gains or with any malicious intentions. Terminally ill patients may decide to offer their consent voluntarily due to depression. Sometimes the patient's relatives may decide for euthanasia since they are not in a position to afford the expenses for requisite medical treatment, especially people who are in coma, since possibility of revival of a person in coma is meek. Moreover, death of cells in the brain is irreversible, and hence a person who is revived will not be in a position to function like a normal person. So far, the only organ that is not transplanted is brain. In future, it may be a reality. Sometimes hospitals and medical doctors who are very greedy force the patient's relatives to opt for euthanasia, and they capitalize on this opportunity to amass money through organ transplant. Hence, a decision of to pull the plug should be a joint decision of the patient's close relatives, personal physicians, and legal professionals, and that should be a legal record. Medical termination of pregnancy (MTP) is similar to euthanasia and is legally allowed under certain circumstances. Hence, this practice can be extended to PAS too. Debates, discussion. Okay, for animals also they do mercy killing. It's all legal. Okay. Debates, discussion on open-ended topics like this can go on forever. Anyway, let me pull the plug here. I'm using the term pulling the plug. Here, let me pulling the plug has a different meaning. I'm going to stop. Anyway, we'll meet again real soon with another interesting topic. Some of the statements, views expressed are solely mine based on limited knowledge gained over 6 decades of versatile experience Always watch these videos with the closed caption subtitles for absolute 100% comprehension as per my sincere recommendation. Zillion times so far. I know I rushed through to complete the presentation within 20 minutes max, which is the norm I had set myself to retain the viewer's attention. I know nowadays I exceed this time limit since I take almost double the time. Since I make honest attempts to cover the selected topic more elaborately, including so many intricate fine details, referring a wide variety of sources, in particular Wikipedia quite extensively, besides articles and books published recently. Besides, of course, I sprinkle my own salt and pepper and season it with my personal experience so far in my life and also intuition. Stay at home as much as possible to maintain social distancing attributed to pandemic, novel COVID-19, and prolong your lifespan. Lead a healthy life. God alone can put a stop to natural, unnatural events, maybe bio or cyber or events like pandemics, which may lead to apocalypse and extinction of all sentient species on Earth for no fault of theirs. Rest in peace and harmony.